You are about to witness history in the making.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another Pop Culture Gamers podcast. This one is a very special one because we have a special guest. However, I'm not going to introduce him yet, but I am going to say my name's Haydn and I'm here as always with Steve. Steve, do you want to introduce our special guest?
Yes, I think maybe he should introduce himself as well. That would be quite good, wouldn't it? Because he'd be totally undone.
Pop out.
But yes, so I'd like to introduce Jamie. Would you like to say hello there? And
hello there.
Have a quick brief on what you're... Because some people may not know who you are, you see.
There's absolutely no reason why they should know who I am, but they're more likely to know who my late father was. So, yes, I'm Jamie Anderson. I'm the managing director of Anderson Entertainment. You're going to hear the name Anderson quite a lot, I suspect, because my late dad was Gerry Anderson. Gerry Anderson, a name that you might associate with shows such as Thunderbirds and Space 1999 and UFO and Captain Scarlet and Stingray and Fireball XL5 and Joe 90 and Terrahawks and Space Precinct and many more. I could keep going, but there's, he made 18 series and multiple feature films and was a bit of a pop culture giant, as well as the man I called Dad.
Excellent.
Yeah. And it must have been an amazing childhood growing up with someone like him as your dad.
Well, you say that, but I mean, it was just a normal childhood for me. I don't know.
It's no different, is it, for yourself?
Yeah,
is it?
Exactly. But I was kind of aware that there was something interesting going on once I was aware of particularly the Thunderbirds connection. And, Thunderbirds, as pretty much every generation has had since its inception in '65, there have been the repeats every few years, at least every decade. And so as Thunderbirds was being repeated on the BBC in 1991, I was 6. Yeah, something like that. So I was at school and my friends were watching my dad's show on the TV and their parents were watching it as well and getting just as excited. So I was suddenly cool, in inverted commas, with two generations all at the same time. And then what came with that was opportunities to go to things that I would never have otherwise got to go to. So, going behind the scenes on Blue Peter when they did the Tracy Island, I was sitting on the studio floor behind the sofa while they were doing a bit of interview, keeping very, very quiet. Got to meet, Pat Sharp, among others, people who were kind of big and exciting to kids of my age. So there was something very special about it. But again, also totally normal. What a bizarre combination.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it must have been a strange childhood. But so was that like your real first time that you actually realised that that this is what my dad does and he has this big impact?
Yeah, I think you say producer to people. I think most people don't know what the television or film producer really does. I mean, you might say produce, but what does that mean? What does it really mean? And so, when you're watching TV as a kid, you don't have any concept of the huge numbers, the tens or hundreds of people who made it happen and how it was made. So all that is kind of completely alien to you until you start to see it for yourself. And so it was only probably early 90s when Dad was making a bunch of TV ads, and he was working out of Pinewood in a tiny, gusty wooden shed called Shed 11. And in Shed 11, they were making a new Tracy Island at polystyrene, and Christine Glanville was in there creating new puppets, creating a Titan puppet for a Weetabix advert and various other things. Yeah. And suddenly I was exposed to the scale of it, alongside Thunderbirds kind of having its resurgence. So it was a gradual awakening. But yeah, the fact that my friends' parents would send their children into school with old annuals from 1965 for me to take home to get my dad to sign and then return back to them for their parents. That was a really strange experience, but made me aware of the impact.
You're a bit of a courier then, more than likely with that.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, that's my main thing is conveying the message of Anderson now, right? And I was doing it back then for my mates and their parents.
Yeah, because you wouldn't have known, obviously, Stirling Road in Slough on the industrial estate, where I lived at the back of there. So I lived on an estate at the back. But over the years, I actually worked. I was an electrician by trade originally. And I worked in Stirling Road, Ipswich Road, all those areas. And it wasn't until later I actually knew, when I saw what was left of it at the time would have been a quick fit type place it was used for, not realising that after watching the documentary you pick up off your store and that, like Slough 21, that one there, you realise what was going on, and it's just incredible to see,
Yes, Protar over in Slough. They get regular visits from people saying, "Oh, can I just come and stand in what was the studio?" Sadly, Stirling Road is now all gone.
Knocked down, didn't it? Yeah.
Redeveloped, yeah. But I had no clue. We didn't really go to Slough back then. But by the time I was kind of getting really excited by it, he was doing stuff at Pinewood, so in Shed 11, or then moving over to L&M stage to do Space Precinct, kind of late 93, 94, around that time. Seeing that all build up was incredibly exciting to actually be on site, and even then I didn't realise the connections to the past. They'd done Space 1999 there, and they'd filmed bits of UFO using the building as set. So I was kind of already immersed in the history, whether I knew it or not.
So that would have been the front entrance where Straker pulled in at the beginning. That was where you got all the whole offices and that. Or was that the back of it?
No, so that was Neptune House,
right?
Which is part of another studio. So when they had medical bay stuff in UFO, and he would often kind of come down the stairs, and there'd be some glass doors, probably painted some sort of orange around the woodwork, really ugly colouring. So that was the lobby of L&M stage that they would use. But loads of stuff in the kind of final episode where Straker wanders off through down a kind of garden path through some fir trees, which is supposed to be at the back of the medical bay or back of the hospital area. That's another bit of Pinewood, and that path strangely now leads to a lake where Dad's ashes are. So he's so interwoven with Pinewood.
Well, so
it's quite a nice place to be.
We both rewatched the documentary last night.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's great to see ITVX now pushing it a bit more on there even.
Absolutely.
After listening to your own podcast talking about it with the guy that would get pushed for that. And fantastic stuff, very emotional.
It's a very personal story, isn't it? Because I think there's a lot of people who've told the stories of the shows and the techniques and stuff really, really well. But at the core of that sits a human being just like anybody else. And I just was fascinated by what made him tick, and all the things that inspired him, and all the trauma and terrible things that inspired so much of the cool and aspirational and positive stuff that has got us talking about it now.
Yeah. I mean, I must admit, I do think, especially my first memory of it was Space 1999, because that was sort of like, it was probably, if it wasn't my first, it was certainly in the top 3 things that have been introduced to sci-fi, which have maintained a love of before. And I loved the Eagles. I still love them now. I was really disappointed that I didn't get the model that you did with Eagle Moss, because I meant to buy that, and it was one of those things of, I'll get it next month, and then it went under, and it was sort of like, because you can't see this, but going in front of me here, I'm surrounded by like Star Trek ships and the Battlestar Galactica Vipers and stuff like that. But I love the design of the Eagles, because that to me is where NASA would have got to.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, there was a real kind of utilitarian realism to those. But good news for you, Haydn. There's more 10-inch Eagles in the Eagle Moss style on their way. So
good.
You'll be fine for your collection.
Is that eagle above your head still there? There's a massive one I remember seeing when I was watching the making of the documentary last night. There was one sitting there to your right, Massive when it was.
So there's a huge eagle just in my line of sight on top of a cabinet of goodies. It's a 44-incher, so it's it's studio scale and it's a real beauty. But the scale models, the studio models, are surprisingly fragile.
Absolutely.
So every time I pick it up by its spine, I'm worried that it's going to crumble and fall to bits. But it's a beautiful thing.
Cool. Do you want to start with the questions we got then, Hayden?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, you've talked about in terms of because you've already answered some of our questions anyway.
Sorry, it happens naturally. It's going to happen.
That's fine. So, but I mean, obviously, you mentioned about being a courier and some of the great things that it exposed you to. But were there any other things that were, probably made your childhood very unique in terms of, who your dad was?
Well, I mean, the famous thing for those who know was Doctor Who, really. So I was bought a Doctor Who VHS by my aunt, I think, in the late 80s. It was Day of the Daleks, falsely entitled The Day of the Daleks. And for some reason, I became completely fascinated with this thing. Mum then went out and got me Sontaran Experiment and Genesis of the Daleks. And suddenly I was like, the actor's different, but it's the same cat. What? This is amazing. And I became completely obsessed. Now, bearing in mind, across the run of Doctor Who, really, that being BBC, alongside it, or opposite it, I should say, were all of Dad's shows competing on ITV. And he always felt that his were far superior. And they were, really, in terms of budget and visual effects.
Oh, God, yeah.
Special effects stuff. It was a, amazingly different scale. And yet, his son, for some reason, even though the show had been cancelled and was no longer on air, was completely in love with Doctor Who. So when he was going to the BBC for marketing meetings about Thunderbirds during the rebroadcast, he would have people from the home entertainment division turn up in the middle of a meeting with a box of Doctor Who VHS releases that were coming up, and they'd plonk it down and say, "There you go, Gerry, those are for Jamie." And I think they revelled in the fact that his son was a fan of their show. And that then led to me going on a documentary produced by Kevin Davis called 30 Years of the TARDIS, or the edit that I'm in, More Than 30 Years in the TARDIS. We feature very, very briefly. But there they had the TARDIS set, and they had Jamie and Victoria from the Pat Troughton era on set, and I got to meet them. I got to meet my namesake companion. So that there were some amazing things like that. I met Sylvester McCoy and Sophie Aldred. Sophie, who has since become a friend these days, as we work together quite a lot. And she's a massive Thunderbirds fan. But we met her on the set of a weekend kids show called Parallel 9, which nobody seems to remember.
I remember the name. I just don't remember the show.
It was kind of supposed to be set on an alien planet or something. I remember very little of it, but going to see those things and meeting those people, I think Dad always found it a bit irksome. And on More Than 30 Years in the TARDIS, he said that the fact that I liked Doctor Who was the greatest tragedy of his life. Which, bearing in mind, you guys have watched Uncharted, the documentary about the tragedies of his life, makes it particularly harsh that he phrased it that way.
Absolutely. So, okay, here's a question for you then. Who's your doctor?
Yeah, because ours. Well, go on.
Well, I mean, I think your first doctor normally is your doctor.
Absolutely.
My first was John Pertwee. However, I then went much more into the Tom Baker stuff. So Tom was really my doctor. I had the scarves. My granny knitted me a scarf, woefully inaccurate. But I just, for me, he was the Doctor. And all these years later, I ended up getting to direct him in Doctor Who audio dramas. So you get, my 8-year-old self would have definitely kind of wet his pants at that thought, I think.
Because for yourself, then, compared to myself, between Haydn and myself, I would hide behind the settee at the beginning of the show. When I was watching it in the 70s, and I, first saw the Terror of the Autons, and they just scared the crap out of me.
Yeah,
that sort of thing was, crazy. But that's what hit, and that's what stuck.
Yeah. Oh, you see, I never got that fear factor. I think because I was inoculated by Terrahawks.
Yeah.
Terrahawks was the first Anderson show that I watched, and with Zelda, the hideous, terrifying space witch, I think that was like a vaccination against fear from kids' TV. Because she created a generation of bedwetters, as I'm sure the Daleks and the Cybermen and many other baddies did. But no, I was very braver than you, Steve. Anyway.
So as was hinted in the show, was there more than a passing resemblance to that character to somebody else in his previous life?
I mean, it as you saw in the documentary, and if anybody listening or watching hasn't seen Gerry Anderson, Life Uncharted, it is a warts and all documentary about his personal life and his attitudes and how it affected his career. And he could be extremely childish and vindictive if he'd fallen out with people. And it's no secret that he had a very acrimonious split with Sylvia. And I think it's pretty clear that he tried to take his revenge by, somehow reflecting her in that character. We hear plenty of stories from people who worked on the show that genuinely was the case. I'm not saying it's a right or grown up thing to do, but it shows a level of childishness in good and bad ways, perhaps a little bit of a sense of humor, but also just how much those events of his personal life really stung him, and he never got over them.
But I still have a sense of humor like that, though, was class really for him, I think.
He had a very dry sense of humor, though, Steve. He would often upset people without meaning to, because he'd say something in jest and they would genuinely upset or believe that he was being cruel or rude to them, but he was just being playful. But he had this very kind of deadpan, monotonous delivery where you genuinely couldn't tell, and I think he probably fell out with several people because of that particular style of humor.
Yeah. So from the point of view from yourself, which was your favourite show of your dad's then? Because there's been so many. Could you pin one down or not?
Are there any that have any special meaning as well?
Yeah.
I mean,
I know Stingray has a good meaning. It's just funny because of the Sound of Cinema, which I've listened to that show quite a while, and they replayed your episode at the weekend.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to pick, and I think much like your Doctor, most people will have their Anderson show, and their Anderson show is so often the very first one they were exposed to. So if we sort of count down in an Anderson style, yes, Stingray's up there because of its kind of larger than life comic book color action, over the topness, which made it more accessible to a young mind. Clearly then there's Thunderbirds, which we'll say is the peak of Super Mario Nation and possibly peak Anderson, depending on your point of view, and the opening story, Trapped in the Sky, is a firm favorite. Amazing music, amazing special effects. What a great setup.
While you're saying that, can I do something about it? So there's a character in there. After I actually rewatched that one recently, there's a character called Meddings in it. Was that deliberate?
Yes.
Should I say? Absolutely,
yes. Yeah. He always threw names in people that he knew. I've got tons of material.
He was working on that show for years, wasn't he? And
exactly. Yeah. No, that was his little nod as a thank you. So yes, yeah, he'd always throw real people's names in there, for good or for bad. There's a character much later on that he named after somebody he'd fallen out with. So yes, there's a pattern there. If you ended up in the show, you'd either done something good or something bad. But ahead of Thunderbirds, as my first Anderson show, it's Terrahawks. It really is, and I know a lot of people, particularly of the Thunderbirds and Space 1999 generation, will go, Terrahawks? What? They'll call it Terrible Hawks even. When I suggest, yeah, absolutely, because it didn't follow the pattern of stuff that had come before, and I think people, Thunderbirds appealed to kids and adults alike, but those kids and adults would then go on and try and approach Terrahawks as if it was a new Thunderbirds, and it was something completely different. It was kind of more akin to a kind of Red Dwarf than it was to to the classic Super Mario Nation era. But the spherical bouncing robots, the comedy, the pantomime villains, all those things really kind of spoke to me as a kid. And I really came to love it. And over the years, it's come to mean more to me because I got to work with the original cast, the surviving cast, to do more audio episodes. So that's made it the longest running, most episodic Anderson show there is. And then doing the documentary, I came to really see just how much Dad's own life and personality were reflected in that show. You know, in that show, Neinstein, this kind of grumpy leader who really isn't best suited to being in charge of working with people, is supported by Mary Falconer, who is the kind of the softer, more human side. Well, he at that time had just married Mary Robbins, and she really is the spit of mum in so many ways. That dynamic is basically, you know, my folks on screen. The worry is in the last season there was a baby baddie born called Itstar, who was a sort of mad German scientist, which is slightly worrying if that's a reflection of me on screen. But I'll leave you to decide if that's the case or not.
Cool, yeah. Because obviously it's its 40th anniversary coming up now, isn't it? So have you got much planned for the show itself?
Well, the 40th anniversary has just been and gone, but obviously an anniversary lasts a year, really. So we've got until next October. I mean, I think my favourite anniversary thing has been a collaboration we did with Brew York to do a Terrahawks beer. So there is a limited edition Terrahawks beer out there. I did have a can of it actually, which I drank during a podcast last week. So that's a nice thing to have. But there's other stuff too. You know, we've done a complete kind of making of book called Flaming Thunderbolts. There's a comic anthology collection of all the stuff that was in Look-In back in the 80s.
God, Look-In, yeah.
There you go. See, this nostalgia wave kind of crashing over you there. There's a new short graphic novel called Deep Blue Z, which is an entirely new story, and we've announced as well that we are doing a final audio episode, which will be out next year. Sort of an audio movie to close off the series. So there's other stuff going on as well, but I'll always try and give some love to Terrahawks because it deserves it.
Absolutely, because I think I saw this week that is the vinyl being released, or is that behind the CD?
The soundtrack, the CD soundtrack is out now. In fact, it's out today, the day of recording, 1st of December. So that is available. I think there's a vinyl to follow, but that's a rather lovely thing because the soundtrack's never been properly released fully publicly before, and in the process of doing the audio drama stuff in particular, we came across quite a lot of material that had been presumed lost. Some really fantastic music, and Richard Harvey, who was the composer on that show, he had a hell of an act to follow, having followed on from Barry Gray. And he just went out and did his own thing, which was so 80s and so brilliant. And the one thing that I always think of when I think of that theme is on YouTube, we've got the opening titles up there, and somebody commented saying, "This theme makes me want to go out and do something heroic today." And I it's got that feeling, which is the same kind of thing actually as you would get from Barry Gray themes like Stingray and Thunderbirds in particular. It's got a kind of stirring aspirational element to it, so it's really nice to have that music out there, and even the pop songs of Kate Kestrel, if that's your bag, which it sort of is mine as well.
Well, see, we like our vinyls.
Yeah, you like your vinyls there, Haydn, but Power Themes 90, I would say that makes your taste in those vinyls rather dubious at best.
Hang on a minute. Power Themes 90, that's actually quite a classic one.
Yeah, because they've never been re-released. Yeah. I mean, I got them digitally, and I passed one to Haydn. Obviously, we don't do that normally. We don't pass digital stuff over, do we? It's not the right thing to do. But the UFO theme they did there, and some of the other ones, how they just remixed them was awesome. Definitely needs a re-release on vinyl.
We may need to agree to disagree on the awesomeness of some of those remixes, but yeah, no, I mean the fact that people bother doing these new versions or reversions or remixes every 10 years or even more frequently is a testament to the sort of ongoing desire from the audience, which is really, really lovely, because there's so many kids shows that ran in parallel with Thunderbirds, which are essentially forgotten now.
Yeah.
And yet here we are, you know, with you with your Thunderbird 2 background, talking about these shows when Thunderbirds is rapidly approaching its 60th anniversary. So, you know, I'll forgive Power Theme Design.
That is like, I can't even believe that to be. I mean, I think that's not far off my age, to be fair, but but it was something special. And Barry Gray, and Haydn will agree with me that it was an incredible composer.
Yes.
Even got involved with Doctor Who as well on the side.
Yes,
didn't he?
Yes,
so
yes,
some people don't even realise that.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, Barry was doing commercials and all sorts of odds and sods, but obviously his main association really is the Anderson stuff. And yeah, he was. I never got to meet him because he sadly died before I was born. But you know, from everything we know, or everything I've learned over the years from listening to interviews with him, and you know, seeing little bits of footage and stuff, just such an unassuming, kind, quiet man. Who was then...
He looks very gentle, doesn't he?
Yeah, he was just this musical powerhouse. And there's a fantastic thing of him talking about how he came up with the theme for Thunderbirds, that he'd been tasked with it, and he wasn't really sure what to do. And he was just sitting on a train, and it just popped into his head, and he just wrote it down. That was it.
How does that happen?
He wasn't there slaving over, you know, over staves and paper for weeks and weeks and weeks. He just went, yeah, that'll do it. And you know, that's a real kind of musical genius, because he's you know, so immersed in it, and a lot of the stuff he did combined styles in such an interesting way. It made the shows completely stand out. There was no other show with music like Barry Gray's stuff out, you know, from the 60s until now. Really, it's only now when you're getting kind of big orchestral stuff with, you know, Murray Gold back on Doctor Who with Russell T Davies and that sort of stuff.
Great, isn't he?
Yeah, but these big bombastic scores, there was no other kid stuff at the time. So yeah, no, Barry's stuff, a genius, and so few shows, I think, can you imagine a location or a vehicle or a scene and hear the music so instantaneously in your mind's ear. You know, if you picture Tracy Island, you'll probably get this very gentle Thunderbirds sweeping strings theme
melody.
Yeah, which is there straight away. The same for Stingray launching, you can hear the percussion and that kind of thing. And for Trapped in the Sky, the Fire Flash landing sequence, just full of that tension build music, which again lives in your mind's ear, whether you like it or not. So yeah, I wish I'd been able to meet Barry, because he was a genius.
Yeah. Do you think they'd ever do another concert? Sorry, Haydn. You did. Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, do you have a favourite theme that he did?
A favourite Barry theme?
I know that answer.
Yeah.
Well, I might change my answer. There's something really fun and silly, and the only time that Barry really shows off in the Secret Service, because writing a fugue, which is an incredibly academic piece of music, for a children's show in the late 1960s with a Secret Service spy priest, I mean, what a ridiculous thing to do, but it's amazing and so of its time. But then, you know, Thunderbirds March, as John Coleshaw said at our Standby for Action concert last year, if that had been written 100 years earlier, it would be our national anthem by now. And I don't think I can disagree. There is something inexorably British and brilliant about it. So yeah, a weird combination there from Secret Service and Thunderbirds.
Can we have the vinyl on Secret Service, please? I'd love to see that come out.
It's out. It's been out.
You sure?
Yeah. Or it's very close, if not already. I'm sure.
Because I thought Joe 90 was the last one, which I haven't picked up yet.
Oh well, I'm sure the Secret Service has been out. I'm going to very, very quickly try and look it up for you.
Because we normally get the emails through regarding when they come out, and obviously because the CD comes out, the pressings are delayed, and they get released about 6 months later.
Well, vinyl's so popular because of people like you two. Picking up all the stuff. There's a huge long waiting list for it, but if it's not already out, I'm pretty sure it will be out fairly soon. So
Did you watch it? Did you watch it, Haydn, that show at all?
No, I didn't watch that one.
Because the voice for the priest, I can never remember his name at the minute. I'm sure Jamie you'd know it off the back of your head.
Stanley Unwin.
Yeah, what a man that was. Incredible guy. Yeah, oh, there it is.
Secret Service vinyl. There you go.
Yeah, see? I'm wrong. Is it? So that's already in the store at the moment, is it?
It is. Actually, it's currently sold out, but I think there's more coming in. So better grab it.
Cool. Hey.
So you had your question. Sorry, I interrupted you, Steve.
Oh, sorry. Going through. Yeah. So something that we're a bit adhere to nowadays with technology and everything else that we have. Do you think we would see something like Thunderbirds in 4K?
Well, I was having this chat earlier on with somebody who works in the kind of the home entertainment physical media business. Yeah. If you ask a lot of the kind of big studios and production companies and distributors, they will tell you that physical media is entering the winter of its life. And we're not really sure if it's worthwhile. I completely disagree.
Physical media is here to stay, as far as I'm concerned.
It is. It's because it's such a lovely thing. Fans of physical want physical. They want to collect it and they want to be able to watch it whenever they want, not be reliant on streaming stuff.
They said 30 years ago vinyl was dead.
Yes, and look now.
Yeah.
8-month-long queues to get your vinyl produced. So
and look at the shipping fees across the states I have to pay. Blimey.
Exactly. Yeah. What do the experts know?
I think the reason why they say this is because we're in a world where we have streaming and that satisfies a lot of people, but it's the people who want the quality, like Steve and myself, who would like Thunderbirds in 4K. Yep, get that UFO Space 1999. Absolutely. And because you want that collection in the best quality you can possibly watch it.
Yes, 100%. So I am pushing for 4K stuff. Absolutely. It's not up to us a lot of the time. And there are things like, Terrahawks, for example, where the 16mm negs, the original negs, are lost. So we've got 16mm prints. Now, is there any point in taking that up to 4K? We're probably not going to get a lot of quality out of it. So no, probably not. But Thunderbirds, where the original negs exist, and the guys went just to such ridiculous amounts of detail when building stuff, painting little signs in the background, all the Airfix girder bridge parts in the models and all the model work. They went above and beyond, and the only way we'll ever see how far they went is to get it into 4K. So it would certainly be on my list to do. I certainly am constantly elbowing the powers that be at ITV and other places in the ribs to try and make it happen. So I'll keep those sharp elbows elbowing.
Absolutely.
Well, you've got 2 customers waiting.
we would be pre-ordering now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
On Thunderbirds, quickly, there's a question I'd like to ask you because I've seen this in it and I thought I was dreaming, and I tried to Google this and I couldn't find it anywhere. But I can't tell you which episode. But I was watching the remastered box set, which ITV brought out quite a few years ago. It's the one I've got. Yeah. There's a scene in Thunderbird 1 where you're in the cockpit and you can see a blue bottle flying in the background. Have you seen this?
I have not seen this. No. This has passed me by. The blue bottle escaped me.
This might be the Mandela effect in operation here.
It's not a dream. I actually sat there and I thought, there's a fly in the is it on the TV or not? Just incredible.
Amazing. Well, no, I was not aware of that. That's bonkers. But stuff that wouldn't have mattered in 1965, you wouldn't have seen it on your tiny screen. But if you watching those restorations, you'll occasionally see a human thumb or thumb and finger come in holding a puppet arm up that would just come into frame just for a few frames, and you would never normally have noticed it, and now you can see it. So there are lots of things in there which if you start interrogating it, you'll see a few of the faults, which are kind of fun.
They are.
They're really exciting. And I was watching for our podcast, we had a guest in whose favourite segment was Attack of the Alligators during the kind of main alligator attack on the house, and watching that in HD, just amazing, beautiful. So yes, it's worth rewatching. You'll see all the finessing they went to, and a few of the mistakes, but that adds to the charm because you don't get those mistakes so much now.
Is it? I don't know if it is. Is it just Thunderbirds that's in 5.1? Did they do that to the other releases?
I don't think they have done it to the others because there's they were done in mono, the vast majority. Yeah. Even a false stereo, a lot of people actually don't want. It changes the experience, and just because we can, should we paint out the strings?
No, we had this discussion last night, and I said no, you shouldn't. No. They've got to be there. That's what Super Marination is all about,
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a joy in watching these things where your suspension of disbelief is sufficient to overcome the fact that you are watching human operated puppets on 8-foot wires, and will engage with them and believe them to be characters that you care about, whether they live or die or succeed or fail. So I think, yeah, the faults, the sort of the perfect imperfection of those shows is part of the reason that they survive and why people still watch them.
Absolutely. So I've got a question. It's a Space 1999 question, because there's been always lots of talk on the internet, as there always is, about a revival.
Yes.
Are we ever going to see it?
Well,
because I know that there's these. I've got these, but
you got the audio dramas. Very good. Okay, fine.
Dramas.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's tricky. So, yes, there have been multiple attempts to do multiple redos, reboots, reimaginings over the years. Space 2099, Moonbase Alpha, something or other. I can't remember what the other title was. There's probably been 3 or 4 at least over the last 2 decades. We are not the people in control of it, so I can't say, yes, we'll do it tomorrow. I think there is always interest, but something like that, if you're going to do it well, is going to be very expensive, and must be done in the right way. And any tiny decision to change the date line, change the character lineup, change the design of the eagle could be catastrophic in terms of whether original fans come along for the ride. I think a lot of people have thought this will be an easy sell or an easy thing to develop, and they've gone out and announced stuff very early on, probably when they shouldn't have done so. So that then has a knock-on effect, in my humble opinion, of when somebody big like a Netflix comes along and looking at classic stuff, because that's what all the big boys do, is they go, what already exists out there, what can we remake? There's very little kind of new IP generation going on comparatively, but they'll come along and go, oh, people tried and failed 4 or 5 times, there must be a reason for that, we'll park it. So it's had a kind of deleterious effect for any future attempts to do it, or any current attempts to do it. There's nothing currently in the works, I can tell you that much. That's not to say they won't be in the future, but the more times things fail, the harder it gets to try and do them right. And that Thunderbirds film in the early 2000s.
I was just about to say that, yeah.
Yeah, so that in particular performed so poorly that retailers at the time, in the wake of that, they all bought up the stock and thought, oh, these toys are going to sell. They didn't. And so retailers for the next 10 years basically said, oh, we're not touching Thunderbirds. It doesn't sell. And then that means that when the licensees come along to do the toys, they don't want to do it because the retailers won't buy it. And then that means that the licenses won't be taken, so the people producing it don't want to produce it because the money isn't there. So it's amazing how much of an impact those failures have, and makes it much more difficult. So sorry to kind of be depressing about it. It's definitely not it's never going to happen. I know there is some will around to make it happen, but it's a bloody tough slog to try and do that.
I can imagine that, yeah. Because I mean, we've seen it happen with other sort of franchises, like Star Wars, with everything that's gone on there, and the very negative impact that the prequels had, and then the even worse impact that the sequels had. So that is utterly amazing.
Yeah, it's a very, very tricky business. So it's not because the will isn't there, but it's often because the politics or the macroeconomics or just the way the industry works is very tricky. And the whole industry is in a period of flux. All the traditional models for financing big expensive things don't work anymore. And nobody really is quite sure how to make them work in a way that works for all parties. So tricky times.
You see the same. Go on.
I was going to say, I suppose that sort of leads into one of the other questions we were going to ask you, which was because obviously your father's shows are a fixed period in time, and a lot of them are very of their era as well, like UFO, Space 1999, or my nickname for it is Flares in Space. All of that sort of thing. And that's my favourite show, Space 1999. How do you have to do much to keep it relevant for modern audiences, or what do you do to do that?
Yes, absolutely. So I think it's very easy for people to view things from the past through a modern lens and go, oh my God, that's so racist or so sexist or whatever. And in many cases, yes, through a modern lens, you may well see it that way, and that's a justified comment. But for all these things, there's obviously the context of the period when they were made. And actually, things like UFO, Captain Scarlet, they were pushing for equality and for pushing for what we would now term diversity, way ahead of its time, which is, I think, one of the reasons it still lasts and people will still watch it. I had an amazing conversation with Samira Ahmed and Kevin Fong, who on our podcast a couple of years ago, and they both said basically watching Space 1999, they saw themselves on the moon doing advanced roles, and they didn't see that in any other shows. So Dad and his teams were doing a lot of that work, meaning we don't now have to be apologists for stuff in the past. They definitely did some stuff which would now be frowned upon. I think one of the biggest things is, until now, and I do mean literally now, we have not really been able to create any new stories for those shows. And I think that's been to their detriment. So the only way to keep them relevant is, merchandise, model kits, stuff that where you can either relive your childhood to some degree or enter into that world. So we've done things like the Space 1999 Moonbase Alpha technical manual. So you can, get this book as if you've just been stationed on Moonbase Alpha and you're a member of the team and you're kind of living in that world. So until now, it's been nostalgia and, recreating the past and letting you enter the world more. Now, for the first time, we've just renewed our license with ITV, and we can, for the first time, I think in the history of all the shows, create new stories in novel, comic, audio book and audio drama formats for all the shows. So we are starting that process now, and that kind of thing I think is a real way to keep them relevant, because you tell stories that fit within the canon of the series, within the walled garden of all the episodes of Space 1999, for example, but they are new things that you didn't see on screen with the characters that you did. So we've now got new ways to keep things relevant, because there's only so many times you can watch 32 episodes of Thunderbirds. Whatever anybody says, if they're going to tell me I rewatch it twice a year every year, I'm pretty sure you're not watching it with the same degree of interest that you did 10 years ago. You're going to be on your phone drifting down looking for new stuff. So to be able to tell new stories in those worlds, that's exciting, and that's what we've been pushing for, and which we finally got. So it's hard work to keep it relevant and interesting. But I just had an email like 10 minutes ago from someone who's listening to the podcast, who's 9 years old, listens to the Gerry Anderson podcast, and has got into Joe 90 and Space Precinct from listening to, as he put it, two middle-aged blokes talking about boring stuff. And that's me and Richard James, my co-host. So but there are ways to do it, but it's a lot of work.
But isn't it great to feel that how you get out there with obviously from us old fogies that have been watching it for years, and you get these kids now that even now are coming up and seeing this stuff, and it's that legacy is snowballing on and carrying on and continuing through long before we're sort of 6 feet under,
and I hope that will carry on, but I feel like if stuff's going to happen, it has to happen like now. The original audience is definitely aging, and as much as I wish they'd last forever, that's not going to happen. No. But there is a real tradition of handing down, and if it could be handed down with, and here's a new collection of stories, here is a new graphic novel of Stingray, here is whatever, suddenly it's a kind of contemporary way to engage people. So I'm optimistic.
Did you get to see, so for Thunderbird's point of view, they did 2 new episodes, didn't they, for the 50th anniversary?
They took the three mini albums, and created the matching picture. Yeah, and they're on ITVX at the moment. I didn't realize they were, because I've never seen them before, so I started watching the first one today. How accurate is that? As if
you were watching it in the 60s. It's incredible.
Oh, I think they did a great job. There was a huge dedication to getting that right. I think you'll never quite get exactly the same look, but I mean it's
close,
90% there, isn't it? I mean, and that's all you need. But you had the benefit there of all the original voice cast, the original effects, the original way it was mixed. You're hearing original stuff and then seeing the picture to match. So that's I think the kind of the way that has succeeded. If you were to try and redo the whole thing in the original style with new voices or AI voices, for example, I think it will lose something. So they had a real opportunity there and did a very good job.
Cool, yeah. Also, staying with obviously with your podcast and that, you've interviewed quite a few people over the time it's been going. Is there anyone you'd like to say that you missed out on due to their age and some of the stars from throughout all of Gerry Anderson? Somewhere, someone has gone on to do other things, whether it's Bond or anything else. Shane Rimmer, for example, and even some of the cast from UFO and even Space 1999. There's an incredible amount of cast they're so strong in characters and physical people that have just carried on in other stuff. Do you think you've missed out on anybody you'd love to have a chat with?
Yeah, loads. Annoyingly, I've got a real kind of angry list of people that I'm gutted that we never got to speak to. I mean, Barry Gray's up there, obviously.
Yeah.
Derek Meddings, Ed Bishop, Michael Billington, Martin Landau would have been fascinating.
Oh God, yeah.
I'm trying to think of Francis Matthews. I mean, I could listen to Francis Matthews just talk, I think, endlessly. Christine Glanville, who I spent so much time with as a kid, who was lead puppeteer on Thunderbirds and so many of the other shows. She was brilliant and fascinating, and I got to sit next to her while she was working on Space Precinct when I was a kid, not really knowing what I was sitting next to, other than, oh, this is a nice old lady. She's very nice to me. But if I could have spoken to her with all the stuff that I know now, that would have been fascinating and amazing. But the nice thing is with all these people, because the dedication of people across the years, many of them have been documented. Yes. So, we do have about 4 hours of interview with Christine, for example. We have 50 odd minutes of Ed Bishop on tape from an interview that was done around the year 2000. So we've got a lot of these people captured, thank goodness, which is lovely. And we did get Shane Rimmer on the podcast, which was rather nice. Sitting at Shane's kitchen table, being fed by Sheila. It was a lovely time. So there's loads on my list that would have been amazing. And again, people like Ed Bishop, I did meet him as a kid, but again, with no context, well, certainly not the context I have now, of just how brilliant and thoughtful. And he was such a fascinating guy, very politically active, very thoughtful, very, very philosophical, just amazing people who would have been fantastic to sit down and just, have a couple of beers with, really, if nothing else.
His voice is such a, I don't know what it is, but I could just, if he talked to me about making pizza, I'd be fascinated. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, Ed's voice. So many of those voices, though. If you look at whether they were live actors on screen or the guys who voiced the puppets, the guys and girls who voiced the puppets, just amazing voice actors, and they brought so much to it. There's a certain 1960s BBC repertory company kind of sensibility where they all were able to give like a slightly heightened performance, but it never became cartoony or comic book. It was incredibly intense and serious. When Scott was flying to the danger zone and Shane was providing these dramatic lines, there was no sense of tongue-in-cheekness or taking the mickey or anything else. You absolutely believed in the drama of that character. Whereas I think animation voices, particularly now, there's a kind of over-the-topness to it. Even something serious has got a comic tongue-in-cheek angle to it, which people just, I don't think they can do it anymore. And that's why it's such a pleasure doing stuff like working with Big Finish, doing their audio dramas, because so many times you bring in actors who were doing those original shows, who were part of that era of actor, and they've got kind of gravitas and just such lovely voices. which, you know, they're not absent now, but they seem to be fewer and further between. So I could listen to a Thunderbirds or a Stingray episode with no picture. I'd much rather do that 100 times over than watch the picture with no sound.
Yeah. Is there more stuff to bring out documentary wise that you could actually, you know, obviously we've had a few Blu-rays come out over the time.
Oh yeah, there's always more, and it's amazing how archive stuff keeps turning up. But like I said, you know, we inherited a collection of tapes from John Huff, who's a very well-known producer, thanks to his family and his son in particular, Paul, who made that available to us. But an amazing collection of interviews there, which otherwise would have been lost if Paul hadn't been so thoughtful and preserved them and passed them on. So there are a lot of stories to be told. I mean, we've just done. We're just doing a Blu-ray release of Into Infinity, which is the pilot film that Dad made between the two seasons of Space 1999. It's got Nick Tate and Brian Blessed and Joanna Dunham in there. And in those tapes was an interview with Derek Wadsworth, the composer who did that and Series 2 of Space 1999. That would have been completely lost. I mean, Derek died many years ago. It would have been lost to time. So there is always new stuff to say, new ways to tell the story, and we're always on the lookout for new material. So yeah, I think there's more stuff. There's more stuff to talk about.
Will you be able to release it? Although Network unfortunately went under. All those releases that were under them, will they still get to be you still get to sell them still, or they?
It depends. Liquidations and all that sort of stuff are very sad, and you know, Tim Beddoes, who founded Network, was a very good friend. So when he died, that was a real tragedy, and then to see the company go under 6 months later was just so sad. And obviously they've done a huge amount for the Worlds of Anderson and so many other cult shows and doing beautiful restorations. The stuff that we licensed to them, we've taken back in-house, and we are producing, and we've done stuff, even taken in other projects like Space Patrol, which was not an Anderson show. It is Anderson adjacent. So I had a chat with Roberta Lee's son, who is the sort of the trustee for her estate, and we both agreed that Dad and Roberta would hate the idea of us doing it, so we had to do it because it would have met with mutual disapproval from the two of them. So we're still putting stuff out, and like Into Infinity, that's a new restoration, so we're taking care of that now, and we can do these kind of niche releases. ITV's titles, I don't know currently what the state of play is. I think we've seen maybe there's a bit of a handover going on, but I don't know if they're producing more. Again, I'll be pushing to make sure that the stuff is as available as possible, because there just aren't that many companies now who would be willing to take on a big restoration job, like doing Thunderbirds in 4K, for example.
Push.
Yeah, those elbows keep elbowing, don't worry.
So what can we expect from Anderson Productions in the next year or so?
I mean, I heard a brief mention of concert, maybe another concert, possibly. I couldn't possibly confirm one way or the other, but I think that would be a rather nice thing, because Standby for Action was such a great event. I thoroughly enjoyed that.
I missed out on that. I would love to have gone to see it.
Hearing it, in person was a real joy, and just such a lovely audience and a lovely atmosphere, and the nostalgia and the power of music got people really emotional. We had people crying as they heard the swell of the Thunderbirds march, or something which evoked happy memories, of warm memories of childhood. It's an incredibly powerful thing, so definitely want to do more of that. 2024 is Stingray's 60th anniversary. Definitely be some stuff out for that, which we haven't announced yet, but we're working on, and I think will make fans quite happy. It's also Space Precinct's 30th anniversary, so 90s kids rejoice. There'll be some stuff there. We've got more comic anthologies on the way. We've got collectibles. We've got the 2 Eagles coming out. In fact, they are on a ship arriving in port any moment. We showcased a Thunderbird 2 collectible that we're doing that's coming up.
That looks really cool.
Oh, it's a beauty. It's a really lovely thing. I've wanted a desktop Thunderbird 2 for years, and basically it's my own selfish thing, wanting one, and I've got it now, so it's good. So I'm very excited about that. Novels, new stories. We are trying to feed fans with as much as we possibly can. with the most variety we can, because I'm a big believer that, you know, some people just like to watch video material, others really like to listen to audiobooks, others really want a printed book in their hands, others want schematics and lovely pretty pictures and making of material. So we try to make as much stuff as we can to meet people where they enjoy consuming it, really. And that's why we do stuff like the podcast as well, because some people they don't want to buy anything, they don't want a collection of stuff, but they're happy to listen to two middle-aged blokes talking about boring stuff. So thank goodness for those listeners.
Totally agree.
Yes. No, that's been absolutely brilliant, Jamie. You know, thank you very much for coming on the show, because we know that you've got to get off for 7 o'clock. But is there any? Sorry.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Sorry to rush. I was enjoying myself so much. I hope I haven't taken us over time.
Not at all.
No. It's been absolutely great talking to you. We'd love to get you on the show again if you would be interested in coming on.
Well, perhaps if we can do a Stingray special maybe, or something like that for 2024, I'll be very, very happy to do that. But yes, and if anybody would like some more middle-aged bants, then if they want to come and listen to the Gerry Anderson podcast, we'd love to have them there as well. So yeah, there's always, you know, we have interesting guests on there as well, much more interesting than me, who are, you know, all sorts, who've worked on the shows, who've acted in the shows, who, you know, became fans and then ended up working for space agencies and responsible for sending Artemis around the moon. That's a true one that we've had. You know, just an amazing array of people, and it's just such a pleasure to have them come into the studio, our lovely studio in Slough. Yeah, Anderson's back in Slough, which is a rather nice thing.
Excellent. I'll have to pop up there.
Yes, come to the Thunderbirds Hotel, Moxie in Slough. It's lovely. You can have a Tracy Island iced tea.
Oh, that would be nice.
Yeah, very boozy. So yeah, make sure you come on the train rather than drive.
It's a bit of a journey from Bournemouth, but it's quite easy.
Might be worth it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, and hope everybody else has enjoyed listening to the show today, and until next time, we'll see you again.